What kind of energy do the particles gain when the substance is heated? Kinetic energy. What is joules? What is temperature? A measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles in a substance. What happens if there is a difference in temperature between two places? The energy will flow between them. What is the specific heat capacity? A measure of the amount of energy a substance can store. What is the equation for energy, which includes SHC? Mass times specific heat capacity times temperature change equals energy. Melting and boiling. In terms of bonds, what happens when a substance is boiling or melting? Energy is used to break into molecular bonds. In terms of bonds, what happens when a substance is condensing or freezing? Energy is released to form bonds between particles. What is the specific latent heat? Energy needed to change a state. What is the specific latent heat of melting? The amount of energy needed to melt 1 kilogram of material without changing temperature. What is the specific latent heat of boiling? The amount of energy needed to boil 1 kilogram of material without changing temperature. What is the equation for energy that includes SLH? Energy equals mass times specific latent heat. Conduction and convection. What is the conduction of heat? The process where vibrating particles pass on extra kinetic energy to neighboring particles. What is convection? When the more energetic particles move from the hotter region to the colder region, taking heat energy with them. Why can't convection happen in solids? Because the particles can't move. Why does metal conduct really well? Because some of their electrons are free to move. Heat radiation. What other way other than conduction and convection can heat be transferred? Radiation. How do we get heat from the sun? From radiation. What is heat radiated as? Infrared waves. How is radiation different from conduction and convection? Medium isn't necessary to travel, only occurs in transparent substance. Absorbing and emitting radiation depends on the surface color and texture. When does an object emit more heat radiation? When it's hot. When does an object absorb more heat radiation? When it's cooler. What do dark color surfaces do with radiation? Absorb it. What do light color surfaces do with radiation? Reflect it. What cooking devices use infrared radiation? Grills and toasters. Why is foil sometimes used? To to reflect the heat radiation to the bottom of the food. Saving energy. What are things that emit energy called? Sources. What are things that transfer loose or waste energy called? Sinks. How can you save energy? Insulate house so sinks drain less energy. Improve efficiency of sources and sinks. What is payback time? The amount of time it takes for the amount of money you've saved on energy bills to equal the initial cost. What do thermograms show? The temperatures at different parts of an area. How does this show this? Using colors. Light colors are hotter areas and dark colors are colder areas. Efficiency. How is a machine useful? They convert energy from one form to another. What happens when the total energy input is put into the useful device? Some of the output energy is wasted. What is the equation for efficiency? Efficiency equals useful energy output divided by total energy output times by 100%. What do Sankey diagrams show? The energy input and where the energy output goes. Waves. What is the amplitude of a wave? The displacement from the rest position to the crest. What is the wavelength of a wave? The length of a full cycle of the wave. What is the frequency of a wave? The number of complete cycles or oscillations passing a certain point per second. What is frequency measured in? Hertz. Brackets Hz. What is the equation for wavelength speed? Speed equals frequency times wavelength. What is 1 kilohertz equal to in hertz? 1000 hertz. What is 1 megahertz equal to in hertz? 1 million hertz. What direction do waves travel when going through a substance? In a straight line. What happens when waves arrive at an obstacle? They change their direction of travel. How can this happen? By reflection, refraction, or diffraction. What does reflection of light allow us to see things? What is the law of reflection which applies to every ray reflected? Angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. How can a wave hitting a surface experience total internal reflection? When light ray travel through a dense material or substance. When does the ray reflect back into the material? When the angle of incidence is bigger than the critical angle. Diffraction and refraction. What does diffraction mean? Waves spreading out. What does the amount of diffraction depend on? The size of the gap relative to the wavelength of the wave. The narrower the gap, or the longer the wavelength, the more the waves spread out. What happens if the gap is around the same size as the wavelength of a light? You can get a diffraction pattern of light and dark fringe. What is refraction? Changing the speed of a wave which can change its direction. EM waves and communication. What are the 7 types of electromagnetic waves? Radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, visible light, ultraviolet, X-ray, gamma rays. What radiation do we get from the sun? Visible light, infrared, and a little bit of UV. Which EM waves are able to pass through materials? Those near the middle. What do the higher frequency EM waves have compared with lower frequency EM waves? More energy. What happens when EM radiation is absorbed? It causes heating and ionization. What is ionization? Where an atom or molecule either loses or gains electrons. What is the advantage of using light, radio, and electrical signals? They travel really fast. What is the advantage of sending information through optical fibers and electrical wires? It's secure and it's quick. Light communication. What is a modern use of light communication? Optical fibers. What do optical fibers do? Carry data over long distances as pulses of light or infrared radiation. What is bounced off the sides of the very narrow core? Waves. What is the narrow core protected by? Outer layers. What happens when the ray of light enters the fiber? It hits the boundary between the core and the outer cladding at an angle greater than the critical angle. What does this cause? Total internal reflection. As the pulse of light enters at one end, what happens? It is reflected again and again until it emerges at the other end. What are the advantages of using light? Very quick, multiplexing, lots of different signals, digital signals, less interference. Laser. What do lasers produce? Narrow, intense beams of monochromatic light. What is visible light a combination of? Waves and different frequency and wavelength. What is a laser beam? A special ray of visible light with a few extra properties. What are these properties? All waves are the same frequency. Light waves are in phase with each other. Low divergence in narrow beams. What are the areas between the pits on a CD called? Lands. Where is the beam reflected? From a land to a pit. What does the light sensor pick up? The difference in refracted signals. What is it changed to? Electrical signals. What does an amplifier and a sound speaker do to the electrical signals? Convert them to sound. Infrared. What are the uses of infrared? Cooking, remote controllers, transmit data, and security sensors. What is infrared radiation also known as? Heat radiation. What can infrared sensors do other than for security systems? Monitor temperatures. What do remotes do? Emit pulses of infrared radiation. How do the pulses act? As a digital code. What will the device do? Detect and decode the pattern of the pulses coming from the remote. What is the drawback of using IR signals to transfer information? It can only be done in short distance. Radio waves. What wavelengths are best for transferring information over long distances? Radio waves and microwaves. Why is this? Because they don't get absorbed by the atmosphere as much compared with other waves. How can long-wave radio be transmitted halfway around the world? Because they diffract across Earth's curved surface. How can shortwave radio signals be received at long distance from the transmitter? Due to reflection in the ionosphere. What is diffraction? When waves spread out at the edges when they pass through a gap or past an object. What does the amount of diffraction depend on? The wavelength of the wave relative to the size of the gap obstacle. Why do longer wavelengths encounter a lot more diffraction? Because they are large compared with the gap. What happens to the signal when the wave is more spread out? It becomes weaker. What happens when a wave comes against something of a different density? It changes direction. What does UV radiation from the sun create layers of? Ionized atoms in the Earth's atmosphere. What are these layers called? The ionosphere. Do waves travel faster or slower when traveling through ionized parts of the atmosphere? Faster. What does this cause? Refraction. What does the amount a wave is retreated depend on? Its frequency and angle of elevation. How can refraction distribute a signal? By bending the signal away from the receiver dish. Why does analog suffer from interference? because broadcasters use similar frequencies, which creates noise. How does digital audio broadcast work? Many signals are compressed and transmitted as one signal. What is this known as? Multiplexing. How are they transmitted? Across small frequency bandwidth and separated by receivers. What are the advantages of DAB over analog? Less interference, more radio channels. Microwaves. What signal do satellites use for communication? Microwaves. How do phones use microwaves to call? Microwaves travel from your phone to the nearest transmitter, which passes signals between each other, then back to the phone. What happens if the microwaves are absorbed by the water in your living tissue? Cells may be burned or killed. EM receivers. Which waves need the biggest receivers? Radio waves. When the receiver is bigger compared with the wavelength, what is there less of? Diffraction. What do optical telescopes receive? Visible light. What do radio telescopes collect? Radio waves. How do bigger telescopes give us better resolution? They cause less diffraction. What does it mean if a telescope is diffraction limited? Where a telescope had small gaps compared to the wavelength they are looking for. Why do optical microscopes have to be small? Because samples are small. Analog and digital signals. What does information need to be converted into before being transmitted? Electrical signals. What can the signals either be? Analog or digital? What values can an analog signal take? Any value within a certain range. What values can a digital signal take? Only two values, on and off, 1 or 0. What does interference mean? When two or more frequencies meet, creating one combined signal with a new amplitude. What happens when you amplify an analog signal? The noise amplifies too. Humans and environment. How can you get skin cancer from staying in the sun too long? The sun rays have UV radiation, which damages the DNA in your cells. What other problems can UV radiation cause? Eye problems like cataracts and premature skin aging. Why does darker skin give some protection over UV radiation? The darker skin absorbs more UV radiation, which prevents some of the damaging radiation from reaching vulnerable roadsides in the body. Seismic waves. What are the two different types of seismic waves? P waves and secondary waves. Are P waves longitudinal or transverse? longitudinal. Are S waves longitudinal? Are transverse? Transverse. What direction do the vibrations travel in a P wave? The direction that the waves travel. What direction do the vibrations travel in a S wave? At right angles to the direction that the waves travel. When do P waves refract? As the density changes. What do P waves travel through? Solids and liquids. What do S waves travel through? Solids. What travels faster, P waves or S waves? P waves. Where do waves change speed? As the properties of the mantle and core change. What does the change in speed cause? Changes waves' directions, refraction.